Thank you to Scott and Steve for the invitation to talk to you today. And so, surprisingly, I'm here to talk about RCEMLearning, because otherwise I'd be out of a job. So there's three parts to my talk today, really, is to try, and hopefully many of you have used the site and are familiar with it, but really today is to talk to you about how you can use it when you're really pushed for time, when all of the things associated with good learning, good teaching are scarce and under pressure. Really talk to you about our educational philosophy and also leave you with some challenges. Okay, there we go. Yeah, so three parts. The educational philosophy, I can't really divorce it from the site itself. I could bang on for ages about pedagogy and show you some lovely graphs about how people use it, and what trousers they're wearing when they're using it, and all of that kind of data. But we're going to ignore that today and really speak to you about three components that try and form the site. Okay? Then I want to give you an overview of the different types of content that's on there, because it's a bit of a beast. I forget myself sometimes, I must be honest. So I need a reminder. And then showcase you, illustrate some really specific examples via a couple of resources of how people are using it for their teaching and for their learning. And we've got some challenges as well. Almost a bit of homework for you, some challenges for you to take away, because we're never finished, we're never happy, we're never satisfied with what we've done, and we always want to get better, and we always want to ensure that we're delivering resources that reflect the kind of environments that we work in, that are increasingly kind of complex and multidisciplinary. So firstly, our educational philosophy, okay? All of those fancy technical things, our pedagogy and so on. The first thing, and this might be really self-evident, is an increasing body of literature surrounding what's called the post-digital. So technology and educational technology and social media, it's just part of our lives. It's almost inseparable from how we learn, how we teach, how we communicate, and how we network. So the post-digital, I was kind of a bit wary about using it because, as the quote here shows, it's a term that sucks, but it can be useful. Because if all of these technologies and all of these kind of emerging educational practices are part of what we do, we need to be very conscious of the fact of how we can incorporate them and use them for our learners and for our kind of learning communities and things like that. Especially because everyone sitting here and everyone in the emergency department, highly accomplished, highly effective learners and educators. And we always try and take on board how we can support that. Okay, how we can support that wide, kind of diverse range of learners, the ways in which they learn, and how we can support them. So the post-digital is something that we have to be conscious of. Secondly, is a man who is both an inspiration and sadly a reflection of my life in so many ways. And that's Partridge. Okay? We'll get an aha in, I was worried about what the response may be. So, with Partridge, how the hell does Partridge relate to education? Firstly, excellent blazers. Everyone needs a good blazer to learn it. Secondly, it's dialogic education. Now that's a mouthful. Dialogic education. What the hell does that mean? Let's take it back to Alan. Alan likes to chat. How do we learn? We chat. We discuss. We converse. That might be that meandering, interiorized conversation that you have with yourself. That ongoing process of reflection. But dialogic education is also a process where you converse with your colleagues, with your team members, with your educational supervisor, in a variety of formal and informal, conventional and unconventional educational settings. Here's a quote from Neil Selwyn just to kind of reinforce that. If any of you are really interested in education and technology and the interaction between the two, I would strongly recommend Neil Selwyn if you've not had a look at. And so one of the things that I feel strongly about with e-learning and digital education, and also that relates to the post-digital. Of course I'm bound to say it because that's my job, but I'm so kind of jaded with justifying its role and justifying its importance. You can learn some stuff on computers and social media, great, okay? Oh, but you've got to be careful about digital natives and digital immigrants and these kind of phrases. It's kind of patronising in so many ways. So with the post-digital and the fact that it's dialogic and it's conversational, online learning and digital learning, which we try to do, if it's done well, It updates and contemporizes some of the most old school conventional approaches to education that are around the world. Why? Because it promotes criticality, it promotes critical thinking, it promotes discursive practices, and it challenges your approach to things. So that dialogic could be individual, it could be team, it could be departmental, it could be cross-specialty. But the interaction of the post-digital with Alan's dialogic education is key. One of my favourite songs, of course, but what we also are very conscious of are dilemmas. Now, thinking of dilemmas, there's only one person I can really recall that experienced the fundamental dilemma, and that was Nellie and Kelly, all the way back in the early 2000s. They underwent what is called a disorienting dilemma, which, funny enough, links to pedagogy and learning theory. Nellie and Kelly's disorienting dilemma was because their relationship challenged their preconceived assumptions about how love works. Now, I told you, partridge and inspiration, there's inappropriate and tortuous analogies and metaphors, and here's one. You can transfer that to the emergency department and your clinical settings and your educational context. Disorienting dilemmas are borrowed from Jack Measure and his theory of transformative learning, in the fact that, especially for adult learners who are very highly accomplished and operating in challenging environments, you'll be presented with, almost on a daily basis in your clinical environments, presentations or ideas or questions even that challenge your preconceived and perhaps even long-held assumptions about how things work. And the ability then to reflect, to engage with emerging evidence, new guidelines, changing understandings of things, is that disorienting dilemma. And what we try to do with RCEMLearning is bring in the post-digital aspects, Alan's chatty approach, and acknowledge the fact that you may be presenting with disorienting dilemmas to offer holistic sight and body of resources that help overcome that. Now, of course, this is all predicated on the mythical, self-directed, autonomous, metacognitive, and all of those fancy words learning. That's a hard thing sometimes. People need some kind of further structural scaffolding to support that, and that's one thing that I'll talk about a bit later on. So, the site. Hopefully many of you are familiar with the site and what's on there. Okay? So just wanted to run through, for those of you perhaps who haven't looked at it for a while, who aren't too familiar with it, what's on there and how it works, and also how we can improve. Okay? These are just some key points and takeaway points from the site. Okay? Since we launched the integrated version of the site in the spring of 2017, we've had nearly 3 million page views. That's not me in my travel tab and hitting refresh repeatedly. It's testament of the fact that RCEMLearning and the college's kind of digital learning portfolio is having a really big impact. So thank you for that. And thank you to all of you who are using and contributing and commenting on all of those kind of things. We've got nearly 1,000 individual sessions on there now. So it's a lot of stuff. Okay? The majority of it is open access. So there are FOMED resources in terms of podcasts and blogs, but every other section of the site, apart from the exams and CPD section, is actually open access, and it's registered under a Creative Commons license. So we're trying to really encourage the reuse and the recycling of the resources for open access, easy to use educational purposes. Now obviously I've got a suit on, so I've got to do my college bit as well. We have to balance the design and the development and delivery of the site with some member benefits. So the only area of the site where you need a password, we try to keep it hidden, is the exams and CPD section, where you'll find the learning sessions and the SAQs. Everything's curriculum mapped. And one thing just to reassure people, or perhaps even let you know how this works, because it's a question we're often asked about, is quality. Okay. How do you get stuff on there? Who does it? Who reviews it? And there's basically two ongoing systems and processes to that. If you want to submit something, we ask that it be reviewed by kind of colleagues locally, maybe a consultant colleague or your kind of educational support network. And we also have an editorial executive that then peer review and check that work prior to publication. But there's a lot of stuff on there now, okay? And evidence changes and approaches changes, and those disorienting dilemmas kick in and change frequently. So we also have a wonderful editorial review board. Every content item, aside from podcasts, because they're just renamed, has a review window associated or attached to it. So within every kind of 2 years or 3 years, every content item on that site will be reviewed to ensure we're delivering resources that are up to date and credible, both clinically and educationally. So the curriculum, it's kind of dry in many ways, but we found as we monitor the way people use and interact with the site, it's been a massive thing, okay? Because the curriculum mapping actually anchors people's educational experience of the site. It anchors the way they navigate the site, and it structures their educational provision and journeys through it. One thing that actually came up in the preparation for the talk was that people didn't perhaps know how many sessions and how many kind of content items were against each competency. And it tells you that just underneath individual competencies on the site. So there are, and this is incredibly tragic that I know this, but it's a beast of a curriculum. It's something like 160, 165 individual competencies. I'm happy to have a little pop quiz afterwards if you want to run through what competencies they are. But we've got something like about 86% coverage of that curriculum now. So that means that every single competency, there's at least one content item on there. Okay. So there's been a lot of work involved in that. For those of you who perhaps aren't too familiar with the site, perhaps the easiest route into it are the blogs. Okay. Again, all open access, really straightforward to get to. It reflects the multidisciplinarity disciplinarity of your kind of departments and your education and your clinical work. There's stuff there from a paediatric perspective, from nurses' perspectives, for educational supervision, and so on. So there's a whole different range there of approaches and interpretations. As I mentioned earlier, of course, in theory, we always talk about and allude to this kind of mythical, self-directed, autonomous learning. Impressive words, all quite scary sounding. Some people like a bit more structure. They like a bit more kind of didactic format to their education. And we try and cater to that as well with our learning sessions, which are, if you will, your kind of core knowledge, that offer a very chaptered, very structured resource that enable you to familiarise yourself with all of the key kind of components from the curriculum. One other thing we try and do is support the teaching and learning in environments and contexts where time is tight, which is the whole theme of the day and the theme of the conference. And two things one thing especially that we're launching hopefully very, very soon is the CPD diary is now on RCEMLearning, and we're launching an app to support that. Okay? So that should be ready imminently. And we also, one question we're often asked, we link in the exams and CPD section to your e-portfolio as well. So any activity that you complete in there is linked across. Of course, there's always more work to be done there. There's always more things that we can improve upon, and do let us know how we can do that. So, the three educational pillars that we kind of looked at today was the post-digital, dialogic learning, and also the whole idea of disorienting dilemmas. How and when and why knowledge changes. And I'd just like to talk to you about one recent resource that exemplifies all three, that illustrates all three. And this was our recent podcast from, I think it was April, on aortic dissection. Now, it's a little different from our regular podcasts, which have kind of journal club things in it, kind of evidence-based updates, perhaps interviews with speakers from conferences, or recently published papers and so on. And this was a podcast about a particular controversial, perhaps, and very challenging clinical presentation. Okay? And it was slightly different in the fact that it incorporated patients' perspectives as well, from things that went quite well and when things didn't go quite as well as planned. Okay? And here are just some responses and some reactions to that podcast that exemplify it, and it was wonderful to see how the resource could be embedded into teaching environments where time It's short and everything is pressurised. So the tweet from Dave Parton exemplifies where it's been whiteboarded, if you will, and it's used for shop floor teaching, to refer to it, and to pass on that kind of knowledge and that kind of guidance. Crucially as well, what we also did with that was that we included patients' perspectives alongside clinicians. So it expanded the conversation. It incorporated that kind of dialogic aspect and incorporated the range of voices and the types of voices that were being heard. That's something we could probably do more of. So aside from all of the clinical and kind of supporting healthcare roles, that was a breakthrough for us and it was well received. But we also generated a lot of interaction from external specialties as well. So in the following month's podcast, some radiologists got in touch and said, "We love what you're doing now, we'd love to pick you up on a couple of points, can we challenge this?" And so they contributed to the following month's podcast. So if you've not listened to it, I implore you to go and have a listen to that. So that's just a single resource that exemplified 3 core pillars of our educational and kind of pedagogical philosophy. And it's something that we try and do with pretty much every resource that we looked at. Now, this is not a selfie of me alone in my travels happening right before the event, of course. This is, of course, a picture of Alan's dictaphone. In part of my preparation for the talk today is that I used Alan's digital dictaphone, otherwise known as Twitter, I don't think that's going to catch on, to try and find out a bit more of how people were using it. So we always kind of had this idea that it was being used. We kind of had that kind of inert data and analytics and whatever it might be. But we're always keen to know, and it was an excellent opportunity to find out more about how it is being used. And here's just a run through of some of those exchanges, and thank you for all of those, for all of you who responded to that, of how it can be used to support your educational practice, both within the department and outside of it, for your own individual dialogues and perhaps a group or kind of an educational network, whether that's in person or kind of digitally mediated. Okay? So supporting ACPs. It helped to support learning patterns such as spaced repetitions. And brilliantly, which was just great to hear, is that it helped transition or facilitate a return to work following maternity leave with some guerrilla learning, which was brilliant to find out about. Okay? So that's a further 3 examples, aside from all of the fancy theory and the technical terms, of how it was used to embed those resources into everyday teaching and learning. We've got a lot of challenges. Okay? There are many things that we can do better, that we need to address, and we need to improve upon. Okay? I also went back to Twitter to ask that question. So the first part is how do you use it? How could you use it? Perhaps we need to get better at targeting specific groups and learning communities. That's not something we do well enough as it transpires. Another huge thing, and this is simultaneously very exciting and a wee bit scary, it's just a good job I haven't got any further ahead of this, is the fact that the maturity of kind of digital learning within emergency medicine is fascinating to see. You work in an innovative environment and it's reflected in the kind of educational resources you produce. And perhaps the next stage of that, and of course we're not the only show in town here, there are other marvellous and tremendous sites, such as, of course, in Emlyn's, in the resus room. Apologies if I missed anyone out, that's just two off the top of my head. And perhaps the next stage is greater collaboration between all of these different resources. I was asked, could we somehow be the arbiter or kind of a judge of that, which is a scary thing to do. But certainly from our point of view, the next step in extending our dialogues is how can we collaborate with all of the different resources and additional resources that are out there at the moment. Now, another small job on the horizon that's being led brilliantly by Will Townend and colleagues at the college is that, as I'm sure you're aware, a new curriculum is on the horizon. So RCEM Curriculum 2020. So briefly, we'll be involved in some stakeholder engagement for that. And we'll be going to ask people what should be in it and how it should take shape and how it should define a specialty. But in terms of how we deliver our resources to you, the next iteration of the curriculum is going to have a massive impact on how the site looks and how we design and scaffold things. So, as more information is disseminated and released about that, do get in touch, because that's something, and it's an area that we can truly kind of improve upon. So some challenges. They're the challenges for us. Sustainability is another big thing. So if ever you've had an idea for an area of the site, or a contribution, or a resource, do let us know. Going back to Alan's dictaphone, okay, that's what you want. That's a glorious way of picking you up today, so apologies for that, okay? But we need you. We need you as well. You are the conversation that we need to tap into, okay? We can only keep improving and keep delivering if we're ensuring that the resources and the pedagogical modelling and the types of content we've got reflect and improve and facilitate your teaching and learning, okay? So either via Twitter or via email, or come and see us at the end of it, or at some point during today, just get in touch. Let us know. Let us know what we can do to improve the site and improve the resources that we have. Because in the post-digital environment, in digital educational settings, when there's a constant recycling of disorienting dilemmas, okay, we need to have a chat. Okay? So learning is both the responsibility of that kind of community of which we're all part of. We've tried to improve and embed the links to that community, but we can do better, and just come and have a chat with us to let us know what's going well and what else we could do. Thank you.